It's been 1 year since the Supreme Court of Nigeria sought to elevate local government administrations in Nigeria by ordering state governors to hand over the control of funds meant for government at the grassroots. That ruling by the Apex Court was greeted with a lot of commendation, but in the intervening period between then and now, the sense of euphoria has more or less petered out and mostly replaced by growing public pessimism. Executive Director, Abuja School of Social and Political Thought, Dr. Amadi joins us now to assess what has changed or what changes that may have taken place in local government administration and the impact of that Supreme Court decision 1 year after. I want to say good afternoon and thank you for joining us, Dr. Amadi. Now let's get things...
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Okay, let's get things started. 1 year after the Supreme Court judgment, how many states have genuinely implemented local government financial autonomy versus mere cosmetic compliance?
Well, I would say none, except I get any contra evidence. But speaking anecdotally, the ones I know, I'm from Imo State, and I've got a couple of reports from people from local government saying, look, since we expect that average of, let's say, 130 or 150 million, some 200 million, that should go to local government because of increasing revenue arising from the devaluation of currency as well as the removal of subsidies, they keep complaining that these funds are not going through that process. Again, what is illustrated two things clearly is first, we know that legal decisions are important and they ought to be authoritative. But in our context, I think that decision, apart from the realism, the ambiguity of power, is incoherence. I think the Supreme Court erred, really, in that decision. The Supreme Court basically could be said to have violated the Constitution because basically, if you read the Constitution properly, what the Constitution provides is a joint account between states and local government. And the previous efforts under Obasanjo and Okonjo-Iweala to create a fiscal regime that allows for mutual supervision by a committee of the federal government and the state to make sure that the money gets to the grassroots and how it's used, a sensible approach, was struck down by the Supreme Court then on the basis that what the Constitution requires is that this money be dropped in a joint account managed by the state government and local government, and the federal government subsequently has nothing to do with it. So this judgment for the Supreme Court, apart from looking unimplementable, it also looks like the federal government itself has no strong incentive to even implement, even if we agree that that judgment perhaps, in my own reading as a constitutional lawyer, shouldn't have been made in the context of the constitutional text itself. But even it's still a judgment of the Supreme Court, and by that virtue of that is binding and should be enforced. But the federal government, in my view, and from evidence we've gotten and anecdotal statements from people, are not capable, and there's some kind of political dealing with the state governors to allow things to be the way they are. So right now, no state government is under any pressure to really strictly enforce that Supreme Court decision. The federal government has achieved this political end and maybe has procured some political value from that decision, but nobody's really dealing with the physical prudence that decision basically anchored on.
Perhaps that may be the case, Dr. Amadi, but are local governments equipped with the administrative and technical capacity to effectively manage direct federal allocations? Those are some of the questions that are being raised. What's your response to that?
Absolutely, absolutely. They don't. And again, back to macro issue. The local government should ideally be under the state, in my view. I mean, Nigeria is perhaps the only country, or one of the few countries, if not another country, where you have a tripartite federalism, federal, state, local government. I think if the Nigerian Constitution and the federal government wants to take over local government, then they should take them as federal territories and have executive attention and strictly manage it in that sense. But as it is today, the best option is to allow states to run local government because essentially the states are a collection of local governments by our constitutional, state has no existence functionally, actually, as a local government. So, for example, a state like Imo State, my own state, has 27 local governments. So if that 27 government is what compose the state. And therefore, it means that when we talk about the state authority, it means state exercising authority over 27 local governments. So there's a conceptual illogic about the way we're going about it. These states don't have even the states are struggling with capacity to effectively implement their budget in terms of policy, in terms of program implementation, in terms of dealing with whether it's security, dealing with economic, aligning their economic management to even close to the federal government. We think the federal government is not very competent. The states are worse off. Few states really have the bureaucracy, have the policy capabilities to even exercise real function of governance. And that's why you see insecurity run riot across it. It's not because the federal government has federalized, its law enforcement institution. There's still sufficient capability in the states or constitutional authorization to take action. But the states lack that capacity. Think about local governments that today, almost like comatose. There have been over many years of state governors basically making them as part an exit to the Ministry of Local Government Affairs. So I think that we need some level of clarity, and this moment of constitutional reform might be that moment to restructure the Nigerian Federation between federal and state. And then the states are responsible for creating local counties, however defined, and running them. Because essentially, that's really what makes sense. We're even thinking that some of the states are too small for real, good enough scale for economic transformation. So talking about local governments now somewhat existing fiscally, removed from states, from each other, I think it's inefficient. I think it's not going to, it's lead to stagnation economic. It's going to worsen economic outcome. The best thing is to allow states to run local government. But of course, you have to get back to democracy. And people forget that democracy is essentially a town union local affair. If elections are reformed and they're free and fair, and then you begin to see people run local governments, come out and run election for councillors, chairmen, and you see town unions, especially in the Southeast where the bulk of local governance around town unions. You see town unions play their roles again. Then you begin to see that no governor at the state capital will control local government administration, because local government councillors and chairmen or whatever they are called will be elected by the people, and there's no necessary or automatic convergence between local government A in terms of who is their chairman and the state governor. So the problem is that we are trying to solve a political crisis of lack of competitive electoral system with administrative reforms that will compound underdevelopment. Yes, we see this local governments are now like annexed, but that's because there's no electoral, system is not credible. And so people don't run election. The governor put whoever they want, even if they called it election, they put them there. And those people know that they have no capacity to exist after the governor. And so they allow the governor to take the revenue. But when you have re-elected local government chairman, then they would, there will be a local government act that defines their physical position, defines their responsibility, and they will then, operationalize it. I think that's the way to go. We can't just conjure up solutions by fiat, change, constitutionalize local government, give them physical independence, structural independence. That's not how to run a modern state, because you're going to talk about an integrated economy. You have to create a public sector that's integrated. And I think leaving local governments to states and having federal-state federalism is the way we can, fast track. In fact, people are even talking about region. The states, some people see the states as too small and in scope and capabilities, right, and saying, look, why don't we even merge some of the states into a region so that you have scale enough for economic, development policies. So in my view, I think local governments don't have the capacity to even be independent, have the money. In fact, we can even have a moral hazard that if this money hits ground, assuming all the money gets to local government, you will now see new state governors who are basically going to live off these resources with no capacity to turn them into social and economic well-being for the people. That's going to be perhaps the unintended consequence of saying, all these local governments should have their physical independence without a good enough democratic accountability and bureaucratic capacity to manage these resources for the purpose of development and transformation of local areas.
All right, has direct funding to local government reduced or increased corruption, given their historically weak oversight mechanisms?
Well, it's increased corruption. But by the way, because look, experience shows that whenever we have increased allocation to states, especially not all the states, though some states are very, a few of them are way development minded, so they perhaps are looking for extra funds to unlock their projects. But in many cases, even if it is IDAs, international development assistance, once it is entered into a sector, health sector, for example, the result is that it crowds out public funding. So if you're going to bring more money into, let's say, a state like Rivers that has very large, internal revenue, IGR is huge. Some estimate about 16, 17 billion, monthly, that's IGR alone. And so if they have increased federal allocation, it doesn't necessarily mean that you find out the same percentage or less percentage, assuming that the outcome is about 30% of that revenue goes to a real project. You discover that it might get to 25, 20. So in terms of quantum, more money, but in terms of percentage of money that go to real, projects and address the needs of the people, you get less. That's the corruption in it. So you increase embezzlement, you increase graft, you increase corruption, and that explains why, in spite of, if you look at the states that would have the largest number of federal allocations, whether in terms of 30% reservation or in terms of the normal federal allocation, you discover that the fundamentals, multidimensional poverty, access to healthcare, education, investments in those critical drivers of development, they are not doing very well. So there's a micro-Dutch disease here where more money carries out, doesn't result in more investment, but actually results in more corruption. And again, it results in violence with people share a lot of money. They begin to think about suppression. Maybe they want to run for president next time, and you see them funding campaigns and politics. So I think that it's because we are struggling with fiscal buoyancy, we're not fiscally buoyant. People may go with the illusion that more money translates really to more development. But if you do a proper audit, discover that maybe not so. And that explains also one of the critique against this administration's argument around fiscal savings. Okay, if you save these funds and they go to balloon public expenditure in wasteful ways, or they go to increase the comfort and the luxury of public officials, then that's like burning a candle at both ends. So you are taxing, it's a tax from the people who are paying more in terms of inflation. And then you are making money, and then the money is being wasted. So it's burning the candle at both ends. And that's really what happens in some of these states. So yes, they have got, the boast that they have got, some of them double their revenue for the federal government because of these savings. But the question is, what have they done with it? So they probably have increased their campaign funds, probably has increased some payouts to themselves and their cronies and people around them. But essentially, if you look at their budgets for real interventions beyond contracting for large-scale building, it's discovered that actually it's less than more. And that's the paradox of more in terms of corruption and a dysfunctional public sector.
It's indeed a paradox, and we'd like to thank you for your time and analysis here on Newsday, Dr. Sam Amadi, Executive Director, Abuja School of Social and Political Thought. Thank you for joining us.